they forgot to mute the call, and I heard everything they planned for after my death. I was born Eleanor May Winslow on a cold January morning in 1947, right here in Sacramento. For 41 years I taught second grade in a small brick schoolhouse on the east side of the city. I used to stand at the blackboard with chalk dust on my hands and the smell of crayons in the air, and believe that if I just kept giving, if I just kept showing up, the world would be a gentler place for children like mine. I married Franklin when I was 19. We were poor but proud, and together we raised 3 boys. My life was never glamorous, but it was steady, built out of early mornings and long nights, and sacrifices that felt worth it because they were for my family. When Franklin passed in 2011, I buried my heart next to him and tried to keep my promise to look after our children, no matter what. I moved in with my youngest son, Aaron, because he and his wife, Justine, had just had their second baby. They said they needed help with the children, and I believed them. I packed my boxes, sold the little townhouse Franklin and I had, and walked into their home with my arms full of casseroles and my heart full of hope. For a while, it was almost nice. I woke up before everyone to make breakfast. I folded laundry while Justine was at work. I rocked the baby to sleep while Aaron stayed late at the office. I told myself this was what a mother did, this was what a grandmother did, and that being needed was the same as being loved. But little cracks started showing. At first it was small comments from Justine that sounded like jokes but felt like cuts. "You use too much soap, Eleanor. You fold towels like someone from the Stone Age. Do not pray with my daughter before bed, she is not a baby." I would smile and say nothing, remembering my mother's advice that silence keeps peace, but every night, in the quiet of my small room, I felt the weight of it pressing down. Aaron nodded along when she scolded me, and that hurt more than her words. My son, who once climbed into my lap with scraped knees and whispered, "You are my safe place," now stood with his wife and said nothing. If you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening. It grew worse after Aaron's promotion and Justine's new job. They began to treat me as if I were some unpaid help they could not wait to replace. Justine stopped thanking me for meals. Aaron stopped calling me Mom and started calling me Eleanor. One afternoon when I reminded their daughter to say thank you for her snack, Justine snapped, "Do not teach my child old habits. This is not your classroom." The little girl blinked at me, confused, and I felt the shame crawl up my neck. Around 200 words into this story, you might feel the same ache I felt. If you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening. The insults escalated. "Why do you not dye your hair? You look like a ghost in my kitchen," she muttered one morning as she pushed past me. "You do not understand the world now," Aaron said when I tried to explain why a child needs stories before bed. "Stop teaching my kids old superstitions," Justine added. And then, one day, the words that burned into my skin like acid came out of her mouth in front of everyone. "You are a relic? An old witch stuck in the past." She said it while her daughter sat at the table, drawing with crayons, and Aaron did not correct her. The little girl glanced at me, her eyes big and frightened, as if she had just seen her mother push someone down the stairs. I stood there with the dish towel in my hands, feeling the world tilt. All the nights of rocking babies, all the birthdays I had baked cakes for, all the mornings I had gotten up before dawn to keep their house running, flattened into one word: witch. I tried to smile so the child would not cry, but inside I felt something shift, something old and patient stirring awake. I was once a mother who believed love was enough. Now I was a burden. That is the way they saw me. A burden who cost money, a burden who took up space, a burden who, in their eyes, should hurry up and die to free the house. They whispered it when they thought I was not listening. They said it in the car, on the phone, in the next room. They forgot I have teacher's ears, trained to catch whispers across a noisy classroom. I kept doing the chores, because habits of care die hard. But inside I began taking notes, every word, every look, every slight. I was not planning anything yet, I was just remembering. Because I had learned something in 78 years of living. Silence may look like weakness, but it is also a net, gathering evidence, gathering truth. That night, after the old witch comment, I sat on the edge of the narrow bed they had given me and stared at the box of letters from Franklin. My hands trembled as I untied the ribbon and opened the first one. His handwriting had faded, but his words had not. "You were always the heart of this family," he had written. "If they forget it, remind them, not with noise but with facts. You are stronger than they know." I traced the letters with my finger and thought of the girl at the table with her crayons. I thought of Aaron as a boy, bringing me dandelions from the yard. And I thought of Justine, whose resentment had fermented into cruelty, and how she probably told herself she was justified. I sat there, listening to the house go quiet, and felt the weight of a long, long memory settle into my bones. They believed they had locked me into a small life, into a small room. They had no idea what they had really locked themselves into. I lay down that night with the sound of Justine's voice echoing in my head. "You are a relic, an old witch stuck in the past." I closed my eyes and whispered back, "We will see." They started locking the door from the outside the day Justine's co-workers came over for brunch. It was a Sunday morning, I remember, because I had just finished slicing oranges for the children's breakfast. Justine saw me coming down the hallway in my house slippers and turned so quickly I thought she might trip over her own ego. "Eleanor," she said through clenched teeth, "you should rest. We've got guests today. Just stay in your room, all right?" Before I could ask why, Aaron appeared behind her holding a flimsy little latch. "We just want to keep the kids from wandering in," he mumbled, not meeting my eyes. They screwed the latch onto the outside of my bedroom door right then and there, as if I were livestock that needed penning. I stood inside, stunned, as I heard the click of the lock slide shut. It became a pattern after that. Any time someone came over, neighbors, friends, even the pest control guy, I was gently encouraged to stay in my room, and the lock would click again. At first, they brought me food, a sandwich, sometimes cold eggs. Then, eventually, just leftovers, half-eaten toast. A slice of pizza crust wrapped in a napkin like I was some stray dog. They were too tired to feed properly. They said it was for my safety. They said I confused the guests. "It's awkward," Justine said once, "when people think you're the maid or something." And I looked at her and thought, you should be so lucky to have a maid with half my experience and love. The truth was deeper, of course. It went back years. Justine had always been wary of me. Back when she and Aaron were just dating, I had found court documents, public records, showing she had once been arrested in Nevada for credit card fraud. It was a minor charge, wiped clean eventually, but it was there. I showed it to Aaron. I told him, not out of malice, but from fear. I asked him to slow down, to think. He did not slow down. He married her 3 months later, and she never forgave me. Now, a decade later, she took every chance to remind me that this was her house, her rules. I lived in the corner room, the one that used to be a garage. They gave it a fresh coat of paint and called it Grandma's Suite. But it was a glorified storage closet with a twin bed and one small window. Still, I made it my own. I kept Franklin's letters in a shoebox under the bed. I lined the windowsill with plants. I even taped up the drawing my granddaughter made for me, one with a lopsided heart that said, "I love you, Grandma." But one afternoon, that same granddaughter knocked on my door after school. She had slipped out of her mother's sight, quiet as a whisper, and tiptoed into my room. She sat on the bed, swinging her legs, and looked at me with a frown too big for a 6-year-old. "Grandma," she asked, "why do you eat in here by yourself?" I swallowed hard. "Because sometimes grown-ups need quiet time," I said. She scrunched her nose. "But Mommy says you smell old, and that you'll die soon anyway." I felt something crack in my chest. She continued, "And Mommy said you're a witch. Are you?" I took her hand and said, "No, baby. I'm just a tired old lady who loves you very much." That night, I cried into my pillow like I had not done since Franklin died. Not because of the words, Lord knows I had heard worse, but because I could see the seed Justine was planting in her own child's heart. Seeds of fear, of disgust, of disdain for the very people who built the ground she walked on. It was a week later when they threw the birthday party. Balloons filled the living room. I could hear the pop, pop, pop of laughter, the squeals of children, the clink of plastic forks on cake plates. I could smell frosting and fried chicken, and that sweet artificial fruit punch they always serve at parties. But my door was locked. I waited. No knock, no call, no invitation. At 2 p.m., I heard a rustling at the floor. A hand slid something under the door. A sandwich, white bread, a single slice of ham, dry as dust. No plate, no napkin, no drink. That was the moment. Not the insults, not the jokes, not the little cruelties. That sandwich, scraped against the linoleum like food for a prisoner, was what did it. I stared at it for a long time before I picked it up. I did not eat it. I placed it back outside the door, slowly, like returning a gift that had been given in mockery. Inside, I stood up. I smoothed the blanket on my bed. And I began to remember everything, every name, every date, every document. They had locked me in, yes, but they had also, foolishly, locked me out of their lives. And what they did not know, what they had never bothered to ask, was that the key had always been in my hands. It was a Friday evening, the kind that used to mean pizza night and movie marathons when my boys were young. But in this house, Friday evenings were for Justine's wine, Aaron's football games, and the kids being told to stay away from Grandma's room because she needs rest. I had just finished washing my face when I heard the soft, static buzz, the kind only a baby monitor makes, coming from the shelf by my door. They had forgotten it was still plugged in. Justine had set up the monitor months ago to keep tabs on the kids when they came in to talk to me, though I always knew it was more about keeping tabs on me. But this time, they left the receiver in my room. And for once, silence rewarded me. Their voices were clear, as if they were standing beside me. "She's not dying fast enough," Justine said, the sound of ice clinking into a glass. "We could have had the renovation done by now." "Calm down," Aaron replied. "We can't just kick her out. People notice that stuff." Justine scoffed. "She doesn't have friends. No one visits. No one would know. Hell, I doubt she remembers her own name half the time." "I told you," I checked. "The deed's in her name still, not ours," Aaron said. "If she dies here, we can claim caregiver benefits and then get everything transferred over." My hand froze on my lap. The baby monitor was hissing, soft and cruel. Justine laughed. "Caregiver benefits? What are we caregiving? We toss her a sandwich and let her rot in that cave." Aaron, "Well, we could move her to a nursing facility. Say she's declining mentally. Sell it to the family as a medical necessity." Justine, "What family? She doesn't have anyone left. Everyone who gave a damn about her is dead. She's ours now." And then she said it again, in that mocking, sing-song tone that made my skin crawl. "The old witch won't live long. Let her rot." I sat there frozen, my breath short and shallow. A sharp pain crept up my left arm, wrapping around my chest like a belt being pulled tight. It took everything in me not to cry out. I leaned back against the headboard, one hand pressed to my chest, and let the pain wash over me. It passed, slowly, but it passed. And when it did, something else took its place, a clarity I had not felt in years. I reached for my old notebook, the one I kept behind the dresser, where I'd written grocery lists and prayers and childhood memories for decades, and I began to write, word for word. Every line of that conversation, every threat, every cruel little plan they had for me once I was gone, I wrote until my hand cramped. Then, I tucked the notebook under my pillow. That was the night I stopped thinking of myself as a burden. I was not a ghost haunting this house. I was its backbone. And now, I would become its reckoning. The next morning, Justine came into my room holding a slice of burnt toast on a paper towel. "You all right?" she asked, not because she cared, but because maybe she had felt something shift too. I smiled and said, "Slept like a baby. Thank you, dear." She raised an eyebrow, suspicious. But I handed her back the untouched toast like a queen declining an unworthy offering. After she left, I opened the shoebox beneath my bed, the one with Franklin's letters. I read the last one again, the one he wrote the year before he died. "If you ever need help and I am not there, call Helen, she'll know what to do." Helen, his assistant for 20 years. Efficient, loyal, silent as stone, but sharp as a dagger. I still had her number, buried deep in an old address book. For days after that, I acted the same. Meek, slow, nodding at their orders. I let them believe they still held all the power. But every night, I listened at the door. Every night, I wrote more. Not just what they said, but how they said it. Not just actions, but patterns. When they forgot to feed me. When they turned off the heater in my room by accident. When they yelled at the children and blamed it on stress. And I began remembering everything Franklin had ever told me about what he built after our separation. The Human Rights Foundation, the silent legal trust, the discreet protections he set up in case something ever happened to him or someone he loved. He had been preparing for war. I had been teaching spelling. But now, I was ready. There is a strange power in knowing the enemy thinks you are weak. It lets you listen without being noticed. It lets you move without being tracked. And most of all, it lets you wait for the exact right moment to strike. They believed I would rot. They had no idea I had roots. And now, I was done pretending I could not hear. Franklin Winslow was the kind of man who could walk into a room and quiet it without saying a word. I met him in 1965, back when we were both young and burning with ideals. He was tall, all elbows and knees, with a voice like a warm baritone. I was a first-year teacher, and he was a restless college dropout who volunteered at a legal aid clinic downtown. We married at 19, and for a while, we were the kind of couple people thought would last forever. He built things, I held them together. But life is a long road, and sometimes you drift. By 1982, after years of his late nights and my endless lesson plans, we signed papers quietly at a courthouse. No lawyers, no fighting. We called it a pause, and never filed for a formal divorce. I raised the boys mostly on my own. He drifted into something else, something bigger. But even after we split, letters came. Every Christmas, every birthday, every time he crossed a new milestone, a thick envelope would show up on my doorstep with his familiar handwriting and a small pressed flower tucked inside. It turned out, Franklin had not just drifted, he had built. In the shadows of the legal aid clinics and community halls he once haunted, he founded a private human rights organization. Small at first, then larger, and larger still. He called it the Quiet Hand because he believed change should be steady and unseen until it was too strong to stop. They specialized in elder protection, tenant rights, and representing people who had no voice. I was busy teaching spelling to second graders while he was negotiating policy with state senators. But he never stopped writing. His last visit was in 2010. He came to my classroom unannounced. The children thought he was Santa Claus, with his white hair and his red scarf. He stayed for an hour, reading stories to them. And when the bell rang, he stood by my desk and said, "You are still the heart of this family, Eleanor. They will forget it. Do not let them." He squeezed my hand and left before I could ask him what he meant. He died in 2011. A heart attack at his office in San Francisco. I went to the memorial service as a friend because that was easier for everyone. I stood in the back while men in expensive suits whispered about donations and board seats. I left a white lily on the podium and went home to an empty kitchen. A week later, a thick envelope arrived. Inside was a single sheet of paper in Franklin's handwriting and a set of keys on a brass ring. The note said, "If you are reading this, I am gone. Call Helen. She will explain everything." Helen had been his assistant for 2 decades, efficient, private, loyal. When I called, she answered on the first ring, as if she had been waiting. "Mrs. Winslow," she said. "He prepared for this. You are the sole trustee of his personal estate. The foundation remains separate, but the assets he personally held are yours. All of them. Franklin had updated the documents a decade ago, naming me his trustee in case no one else deserved the title, as he wrote. It seems he never truly let go. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper of my little rental and thinking I had misheard. His personal estate? I asked. Yes, ma'am, Helen said. The villa in Sonoma, the trust account, the emergency contacts, and a standing retainer with a law firm specializing in elder rights and investigative litigation. I felt dizzy. Franklin had never spoken of a villa. We had barely been able to afford a used car when we were married. But there it was. A deed in my name, quietly transferred years before, managed by the foundation, but reserved for my use. The villa was not just a house. It was a fortress of sorts, designed for retreats, with private lines, secure storage, and, most surprising of all, a network of contacts Franklin called the Lifeline. The Lifeline included 3 things. Helen herself, empowered to act on my behalf. A law firm with full access to his records, trained to intervene immediately if I was endangered. A small but fierce group of investigative journalists who had partnered with him on elder abuse exposés. He had built a safety net for me without ever telling me. While I was sending him birthday cards and crocheted scarves, he was building a quiet army. In the years after his death, I never touched any of it. I stayed in my small house, living off my pension, teaching part-time, pretending I was just another widow. I told myself it was better that way. I told myself I did not need his help. I told myself my boys would take care of me, because I had taken care of them. Now, sitting in Aaron and Justine's locked room with the baby monitor hissing in my hand, I realized Franklin had known this day would come. He had known that sometimes love curdles into entitlement, and that the people you sacrifice for can turn into the people who harm you. He had left me the tools not because he doubted me, but because he trusted me to know when to use them. I opened my notebook and copied Helen's number from the old letter. I traced it with my finger like a prayer. For the first time in years, I felt my back straighten, my lungs fill with more than survival. I whispered into the quiet, "You did not leave me after all." The villa in Sonoma came into my mind. I had only seen pictures, an old photograph tucked into one of Franklin's letters, sunlight spilling over ivy-covered walls. It had wide verandas, a garden full of orange trees, and a little study lined with books. It looked like the kind of place a person could begin again. I imagined standing there, keys in hand, my own name on the deed, no locks on the doors, no cold sandwiches shoved under thresholds. But more than that, I imagined what Franklin would say now, that silence can be a weapon, but truth is the blow, that no one should have to endure what I was enduring, that I could call Helen and she would move mountains, no questions asked. And for the first time since moving into Aaron's house, I smiled. Not the polite smile I gave Justine when she insulted me, not the forced smile I gave the children when they looked at me with pity. A real smile, the kind a person wears when they remember who they are. Franklin had died, but he had not left me. He had built a bridge back to my own power, brick by brick, in the form of a villa, a trust, a lifeline. Now it was my turn to cross it. I waited 3 more days before I made the call. Not because I doubted, but because I wanted them to laugh a little longer. Let them toast to the future they thought they were stealing. Let them clink glasses over dinner, while I sat in my room with my notebook and a pen sharpened like a blade. I wanted them to feel safe, complacent, so that when the truth hit, it would knock the wind right out of their entitled lungs. When I finally dialed Helen's number, my fingers trembled. It had been years since I heard her voice, but she answered on the first ring, like no time had passed at all. "Eleanor," she said, steady and warm, "I've been expecting your call." "I need help," I whispered. "No," she replied, "you need justice, and you're going to get it." Within 24 hours, the machine was in motion. Helen had not slowed down one bit since Franklin's death. At 72, she was still sharper than most judges and colder than any corporate executive I had ever met. She did not ask for permission, she asked for details. "Tell me everything," she said, and I did. I told her about the locked door, the leftover food, the baby monitor. I recited their words word for word, letting the venom seep out of me slowly and deliberately. I told her what my granddaughter had asked me. "Are you a witch?" And the way Aaron did not even flinch when Justine spat that word across the kitchen table. Helen did not interrupt once. When I finished, she simply said, "It's time." By the next evening, the first hidden camera was installed. A tiny device, no bigger than a coin, slipped inside the smoke detector in my room. More followed. In the hallway, the kitchen, and even a false electrical outlet in the living room. All hidden, all motion activated, all streamed directly to Helen's secure server. She also filed an anonymous report to the state's Elder Protective Services, citing signs of neglect, isolation, and financial manipulation. "Don't worry," she said when I asked about my name. "You are invisible for now, but not for long." The third move was calling in a favor from an old contact at the Sacramento Herald, a seasoned investigative reporter named Carla Morgan, known for blowing open scandals no one else dared touch. Carla had a soft spot for stories like mine. Quiet women, overlooked, underestimated, ready to burn down the house with nothing but a truth nobody believed they were brave enough to tell. But it was the fourth move that truly scared me. A scheduled wellness check by the city's social services. Not a random visit, a deliberate test. I was told not to change anything in the house, not to act suspicious, not to warn the children. So I stayed silent. They kept doing what they had always done, and the cameras kept catching it all. It only took 5 days to gather everything. There was footage of Justine standing in the hallway, yelling at me for using the good towels again, calling me a leech, a parasite, a washed-up old hag who should have died with her husband. There was footage of Erin shrugging as she turned off the heat in my room at night, muttering, "Let her wear a damn sweater if she's cold." And there was the worst one, the one I could barely watch. I had been locked in my room for nearly 3 days straight under the pretense that they were fumigating the house, but I heard the kids playing in the backyard, and I knew it was a lie. No meals were brought. Just water once, in a chipped mug left on the floor outside my door like I was a dog. Then came the clip that Helen emailed to me with no subject line, just the timestamp. It was the living room. Justine and Aaron were drinking wine on the couch, half watching television, half arguing about which wall they wanted to knock down first, once the witch is gone. And then their daughter, my sweet granddaughter, came into the frame, holding a drawing. "Look, Mommy, I drew Grandma in the garden." Justine took the paper without looking. "That's nice, sweetie. Can she come to my birthday next week?" the child asked. Justine smirked and said with the kind of casual cruelty only a practiced liar can achieve, "She'll probably be dead by then, baby. That's what old people do. They die." The child blinked. "But I don't want her to die." Aaron, "Never one for Grace," muttered. "Don't worry, kiddo. She's lived long enough." The little girl looked at the floor. That was the clip. That was the dagger. Helen called me 2 hours later. "It's enough," she said. "We have what we need." But I told her, let them laugh a little longer. I wanted one more week. One more birthday party they could throw without guilt. One more day where Justine could sip her wine and dream about countertops. One more night where Aaron could sit on the porch and think about the title change he thought was inevitable. I wanted them to walk to the edge of the cliff with their eyes closed and their mouths full of power they never truly owned. Then, and only then, I would give the world the push. Let them laugh, let them toast, let them plan. The silence is almost over. The article went live on a Monday morning, tucked between local election updates and a fluff piece about a new bakery. But by noon, it was the top story on the Sacramento Herald's website, and by sunset, it was everywhere. Elderly woman locked and starved by own family. Survivor is former teacher, widow of human rights advocate. They used a photo of me from my teaching days. Gray sweater, half glasses, soft eyes. The headline was sharp, but the story cut deeper. It was written with precision, backed by facts, timestamps, video stills. Carla Morgan had done her job well. There were no names in the article, not yet, just initials, quotes, and a storm brewing beneath every paragraph. But the clip changed everything. A 60-second compilation, Justine yelling, "You're a parasite." Aaron laughing, "She'll be dead soon." And that heartbreaking moment when my granddaughter quietly said, "But I don't want her to die." It was edited cleanly, respectfully, but it held nothing back. It was posted on the Herald's YouTube channel at 3:02 p.m. By 5 p.m., it had 500,000 views. By 8, the hashtags began trending. Justice for Eleanor, not just a grandma, Sacramento silence. Then came the flood. People began digging. The internet is merciless when it senses blood. And Aaron and Justine had left a trail. Old social media posts were unearthed. An Instagram photo from last Christmas, Justine holding up a wine glass captioned, "Babysitting a fossil this week. Pray for me." Another post from Aaron, a tweet from 2 years prior. "If I ever become a burden, just wheel me into the woods. No time for guilt trips." Screenshots poured into the comment sections. She locked her mother-in-law up but teaches preschoolers? Fire them both. Where are the kids now? Someone check on them. Local stations picked up the story by nightfall. KQSR parked a van in front of their house. Neighbors stood behind their windows, peeking out like a Netflix drama was filming live on their street. I stayed quiet. I stayed still. But Helen? Helen orchestrated a masterpiece. She coordinated with Elder Protective Services and Sacramento PD. By Tuesday morning, there was a formal investigation underway. Officers arrived, not with sirens, but with notebooks and badges. Calm, measured, lethal in their professionalism. They asked me questions. I answered them with facts. I gave them the notebook I had been writing in. I handed over the timeline, the names, the statements. I did not weep. I did not stutter. I was not a victim anymore. They took photos of the locked door, the sandwich still sealed in a plastic bag, untouched, kept for evidence. They collected my medical records, showing weight loss, blood pressure spikes, a near-miss heart attack that I had endured in silence. By Thursday, Aaron was placed on administrative leave from his corporate job. By Friday, Justine was terminated from her position at the private preschool. Both decisions were framed as pending investigation, but the public opinion had already turned. No school wanted a woman on staff who called her own mother-in-law a rotting witch and fed her like an animal. I watched the news clips on Helen's laptop from the villa in Sonoma. I had moved out quietly 2 days earlier, at dawn, while Aaron was at work and Justine was sleeping off whatever wine she'd used to numb the tension. I left no note. Just silence. The clip of the local reporter standing outside their house made me chuckle. "Sources close to the family suggest this is not an isolated incident," the anchor said. "Neighbors report they rarely saw the elderly woman leave the house. Some claimed they did not know she lived there at all. They did not know I had owned the house. They did not know that every wall Justine picked colors for, every floor Aaron walked across in his smug silence, was paid for by the very woman they locked away." Online, the support grew louder. People offered to send letters. Teachers shared their own stories of elderly parents forgotten in back rooms. Caregivers raged at the injustice. And someone started a GoFundMe titled "A Garden for Eleanor." It raised $85,000 in 4 days. I had it redirected to a fund for local senior care workers in underpaid districts. I had never needed the money. I just needed the world to see what silence looks like when it finally speaks. Meanwhile, Justine tried damage control. She posted a video from her car, eyes red, tissues in hand. "I'm not a monster," she said. "We were overwhelmed. Eleanor, she was difficult. She didn't respect boundaries. We tried our best." The comments section did not agree. Aaron tried calling. I let it ring. The voicemail he left said, "Mom, this is a disaster. Can you please say something? They're threatening to sue. Just say, it was a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. No, my darling boy. This was understood perfectly. For years, I gave everything. I cleaned, I cooked, I folded their children's socks, I gave them my body when I was strong, and my presence when I was fading. And when they thought I had nothing left to offer, they stuffed me into a room and waited for my breath to stop. But now the world was breathing for me. Now, the world saw. Not because I shouted, not because I begged, but because I remembered. Because I planned. Because I let them laugh just long enough to forget that I still knew how to win. And now? Now the spotlight was no longer theirs. Justine's video came 2 days after the article hit national syndication. She filmed it in her car, face bare, mascara smudged just enough to look accidental. A trembling voice, forced hiccups. Carefully chosen background music humming low. "I know what people are saying," she began, eyes darting toward the camera, then quickly away. "But I'm not a monster. I didn't mean to hurt Eleanor. She's my mother-in-law. She's difficult. She's old-fashioned, you know. She doesn't respect boundaries, but we never wanted her to suffer." In the comments, the world responded with teeth. "You called her a parasite. You shoved cold bread under the door. Boundaries. You locked her up." The clip of her crying was shared alongside the footage of her telling her daughter that Grandma would probably be dead before her birthday. The internet does not forget, and in this case, it did not forgive. Aaron took longer. I expected that. Pride runs deeper in men who think silence is strength, but eventually he came. I was standing in the garden at the Sonoma Villa, pruning the lavender bushes by the fountain when he walked through the open gate like he still belonged there. He looked older, not in years, but in weight, like regret had sunk into his bones. "Mom," he said, hands in his pockets, "I came alone." I didn't say anything. I let the wind do the talking. He cleared his throat. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I didn't think it would get this bad. I was just trying to make things easier." "Easier for who?" I asked, clipping a dead stem. "You? Or her?" He flinched. "Look, I was stupid. I know. I should have stood up to Justine. But now the house is frozen, the accounts are locked. The foundation sent us a notice about back taxes. Mom, I need help. Just this once. Please." I turned to face him. "You want help?" I asked softly. He nodded. "Yes." I took a step closer, just enough to make sure he heard every word. "Then help yourself," I said. "You told me old people should be quiet, so be quiet. And rot, just like you told your daughter I would." His mouth fell open, the color draining from his face. "I didn't mean that," he whispered. "But you did," I said, still calm. "You meant every word. You laughed while your wife talked about gutting my room for Airbnb rentals. You watched me lose weight, sleep on sheets so thin I could see the mattress beneath. You let her humiliate me in front of your children. And now you're here because you lost your cushion." He dropped his head. "Mom, I'm begging you." I turned back to the lavender. "You begged nothing when I asked for heat, for respect, for basic human decency. Now you can beg the court." That was the end of that conversation. The house in Sacramento, still in my name, was already being evaluated for sale. The accounts Justine thought she'd inherit? Reclaimed. The trust Franklin had built, the villa she once mocked as some crumbling vineyard, now mine and legally untouchable. But the one thing I didn't lock out was the child. A week later, a letter came in a yellow envelope with glitter glue on the corners. Inside was a drawing, a stick figure garden, a small house with 3 cats, and me standing beneath a big tree with a crown on my head. The note was written in a child's careful hand. "Dear Grandma, I'm sorry I called you a witch. I didn't mean it. I miss your stories. Can I visit you and the cats? I still remember the one about the sunflower that waited for the moon." I cried then, not because of the pain, but because it meant something had survived. That all my quiet planting, all my bedtime tales and whispered songs had not been in vain. I wrote back, 1 line only. "If you still remember the story I told you when you were 5, then yes, sweetheart, I'm still here." And I was. Not for Aaron, not for Justine, but for the one bloom that had not been poisoned. The villa in Sonoma smelled like oranges and rosemary when I arrived. The garden was wild and overgrown, but in that way that made it feel alive, not neglected. Birds nested in the corners of the roof. Sunlight warmed the stone paths in the morning. 3 stray cats had adopted the place long before I did. 1 black, 1 gray, one as white as moonlight. They followed me everywhere, like little shadows that remembered kindness. I walked those paths barefoot for the first week. Let the earth remember me. Let my feet remember that I was still real. Inside, Franklin had left things just as I imagined. Shelves of books, old records, a writing desk near the window. There was a letter waiting in the top drawer. It simply read, "You made it. I never doubted you." I began each day by opening the windows and feeding the cats. I planted rosemary and thyme and filled the kitchen with the smell of baked bread. The silence was no longer heavy. It was holy. It was mine. And with the money Franklin left me, I built something new. A scholarship fund for children raised by grandparents, for girls who were told their voices were too soft, for boys who needed a place to go after school. I called it the Witch's Garden. I figured if they were going to call me a witch, I might as well plant something in that soil, let it bloom. People laughed at the name at first. Then they started donating. By spring, we had our first 12 recipients, every one of them a child who had nearly fallen through the cracks. Meanwhile, Aaron and Justine had fallen into one. The last I heard, they were living in a small rental outside Citrus Heights. Justine worked part-time at a thrift store. Aaron picked up hours driving for a delivery app. The kids had been moved into public school, not a punishment, just a new reality. I did not rejoice in their ruin, but I did not mourn it either. One afternoon, while picking up supplies for the community garden, I passed the local resource center. Outside, a line of people waited for free groceries. Two familiar figures stood near the back, Aaron in a fraying coat, Justine staring at the ground. They did not see me. But I saw the paper posted on the bulletin board beside them. It was a feature article. Sacramento Living. The headline read, "Eleanor Winslow, from forgotten mother to silent icon of elder justice." I stood there for a moment, watching the wind flutter the page. Then I turned and walked back to my car, the cats waiting at home, the bread still rising in the oven. I had nothing more to say. Nothing more to prove. As I sat beneath the arch of bougainvillea that evening, a breeze carried the scent of lavender across the porch. I closed my eyes, hand resting gently on the arm of the chair, and I thought of all the times I had been told to be quiet. All the times I had obeyed. All the times that silence had built something stronger than anger. And I smiled. And that was my story. If you've made it this far, thank you. Not just for listening, but for hearing me. Because sometimes the loudest truths are the ones whispered behind locked doors. If this story touched something deep in you, if you've ever been overlooked, silenced, or told you were too old to matter, you're not alone, and you're not powerless. Here at Grandma True Stories, we share real voices from the quietest corners. Stories of injustice, sacrifice, and the kind of revenge that doesn't scream, it remembers. So, if you believe wisdom matters, if you believe dignity has no expiration date, and if you believe silence can still change the world, subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Turn on that notification bell. And help us carry these truths further than they were ever meant to travel. Thank you for staying with me. Now go water something that still has time to bloom.